So today I'm going to do something a little bit, well, it's not really that different because it's kind of the essence of how I kind of do everything. But I have with me today so far someone who knows very, very little about astrology. And I'm going to be doing a topic that's actually intermediate to advanced astrology. So, what I basically was saying to her was, so really, what I'm basically going to do today is do a course in how to investigate whether something is worthy of investigation or worthy of usage or not, right? Because ultimately, in the kind of astrology that I practice, which is traditional, it's really all about what are the effects? What did you come to the right judgment? Are you accurate? Are you correct? Did you predict correctly? Right. So it's all about can you provide evidence based on what you've seen? And I've been talking about this before. Evidential phenomenon based on what you're looking at in the chart. So we're talking to somebody who knows I'm sure nothing about what I'm going to talk about today. So let's go from the very beginning. So we have signs, we have planets, we've got the circle of the houses. Yes. And as a matter of fact, let me get a chart. Let me open up a chart thing here so that I can kind of make an example of what I'm talking about. We've got signs, we've got planets, and you can kind of see that there with all of that. Let's just use for today right now. All right. So keep in mind that the circle of the stars or the circle of your chart is 360 degrees, right? So 360 degrees makes a chart, makes a circle, which the chart is based in, correct? Now, it doesn't have to be in a circular format, but it is in this particular. So that's an important thing to be thinking about because we're going to be dealing with angular distances, right? If from here to here is 360 degrees, then from here to here is 180, right? That's 180, right? From here to here, if we cut that in half, from here to here is 90, right? So that means that we could, with each of these slices, add an extra 30 degrees. Now, this is going to be important coming down the line because, like I said, we're dealing with distances. So as I mentioned, we have signs, we've got planets, and we've got the circle of the houses. And each of these slices is a house. And the house is essentially an area of life. So the signs basically are ruled by the planets. The signs modify you've been in enough of my clubhouse things. You've heard me talk about this. Signs modify planetary behavior, but also signs are of the same substance as the planets who rule them. Okay. Then we've got aspects which are angular relationships between planets. So this is 30, this is 60, this is 90, well, really, this is 30, this is 60. So between this object and this object, there's about 60 degrees. We could continue 90, 120. So there's approximately 120 degrees between that one, 150, 180. Remember, we mentioned that from here to here is 180 degrees. Okay. So planets represent things, signs represent things, houses all represent things. At the same time, the ancients, and when we get to it, we're going to really talk about ancients. The ancients actually used the distance between two things to come to an idea. And then, since the ascendant was considered the place of life, right? That's where all questions, all beginning of life, all questions start. Everything in astrology starts at the ascendant for the most part. Then what they would do is, let's say they were talking about your father. Okay, let's say they wanted to find something that had to do with your father. So the fourth house is the father, but so are the sun by day and Saturn by night. Oh, here comes Maria. Fantastic. Hey, Maria. So here, so are the sun by day and the Saturn by night. So Maria, we're basically just I'm giving Sapphira our background into this whole thing. So she knows very little. So I'm kind of doing a 101 basically, kind of to bring us to the actual subject. So as I mentioned, signs represent things, planets represent things, these houses represent things, and everything is encapsulated within a 360-degree circle in which there are 30-degree segments that can be sliced. Okay, so what the ancients would do was they would look at the father. They would look at the part of the. They would, if we were talking about father, they would look at the fourth house and the cusp of the fourth and the planet who rules it. They would look at what did I say? Right. Then they would look at maybe Saturn, sun by day or Saturn by night. But they would also look at the distance between the sun and Saturn. And then, as I mentioned, everything begins for the most part at the ascendant. And then they would actually project that distance from the ascendant. Okay, so they would, so for instance, indeed, by day, the part, so that's a lot or a part. And so this is the term lot, as in like your lot in life, as in the distance between these brings you here. And so that's what you get, right? So here is the sun, who represents the father by day, and here is Saturn, who represents the father by night. Now, it just so happens that they are in almost exact opposition. All right, so sun is at 21 degrees of Libra and 43 minutes. So that the thing with the circle is degrees. The thing with the whatever the what do you call that? That's a V entered. Welcome V. That means minutes. And so here once again 21 degrees and 54 minutes. Welcome V. I wonder if that's Venusian. Welcome if that is. If it's not, welcome anyway. And so what we would then do, noting that there's 180 degrees and 11 minutes between Sun and Saturn, we would then add that amount to the ascendant. And so the part of father for this chart would bring us to 10 degrees and 25 minutes of Pisces. Hey, welcome. So good to have you. So we're talking about this lot of spirit. I'm basically bringing Sapphira up to speed with what the lots actually are. What is it we're actually doing? And so, as I was saying, signs represent things, planets represent things, houses represent things, but then you can find other things. So just like basically nowadays they use asteroids like Lilith and Ceres and that kind of thing, back in this period, they were using lots. And so the most used lot and the most prominent and the most important is this one, the part of fortune, which is taken by day from the sun's distance to the moon. And then by night, the opposite. So by day, we would go from Leo to Pisces, and by night, we would go from Pisces to Leo. It's daytime. So let's go ahead and check this. Here we are at 21 Leo, sorry about that. And there the moon is at 25 Pisces. So we would go back 30 degrees, 60, 90, 120, 150 degrees, and forward 4. So now we would do that. So 154 degrees or 146 degrees basically is what we would do, but 150 minus 4. So we now do the same thing from the ascendant. 150 is what? Oh, it's plus 4. Sorry about that. It's going forward 4. So as you can see, 150 would bring us to 10 degrees and 14 minutes of Aries, and then plus or minus 4 would be 1354, as we can see here. So we have double checked. Now, I have other videos on the part of fortune. So I'm not going to fully kind of go into that for the moment right now, although we kind of can since we've got a small group. But I would say go back to either my my traditional astrology course, which talks about the part of fortune and looking at substance, and then I have just a standalone video on the part of fortune as well. And then also those who've been with me on Thursdays and Sundays know that I use it as an ascendant as well. And so we got this Jupiter on the ascendant, that's kind of cool, or Jupiter on the part of fortune, that's kind of interesting. But that, be that as it may, this is what we're talking about today. Now, not specifically this particular lot, but this is one of 97 that were used going back probably as far as the 7th century, 5th century, 6th century. But this is the part of fortune, but we're not looking at that one specifically today. We're looking at a different one, which is also considered to be the most important. So this actually started because of, it's all Layla Akbar's fault, and she's not even here. So Layla Akbar said, you did the thing on the part of fortune. Why not do the thing on the part of spirit? And I was like, well, I don't know. I mean, it's not really useful. But then as I thought about it, I was like, hey, this is a great idea because I haven't. I mean, I have used it in a certain context as far as looking for fame is concerned, but in a general context, as far as looking at it in natal charts or etc., let's see, because it is considered to be the most effective part after the part of fortune. So we start with Vettius Valens in the 2nd century. And so he says, for reasons mentioned above, the lot of fortune and daemon have great influence on undertakings and their outcomes, right? So undertakings. So anything that's an undertaking could be possibly conceived as the 11th or 10th house, right? The dream of the undertaking is the 11th. The actual undertaking itself might be the 10th. I mean, we can quibble about all of that kind of stuff, but certainly that's what it seems to be pointing to. Right? So great influence on undertakings and their outcomes. The former gives information about matters concerning the body, right? Which is why I've been using it as an ascendant, and concerning the work of the hands. But we've also talked about how the part of fortune is the path to fortune, and how you can see the attitudes represented by the part of fortune and the ruler of it contributing to what it is that we do for a living. And certainly to how it is that we bring money into our life. And so, like, once again, if you haven't seen the things on it's what the second house and substance, or finding the significator of substance, or any of those money videos, go look at that, because they're all based on the part of fortune. It will be necessary. Let's see. Oh, wait. Former gives information about matters concerning the body and concerning the work of hands. Daemon, which is what we're looking at. Daemon is another word for spirit, which is where the word demon comes from. Its ruler gives information about spiritual and intellectual matters, and about the activities of giving and receiving. Now, giving and receiving is another word for sales, right? Sex is giving and receiving, right? So activities of giving and receiving. Can we come up with some other ideas of what are activities of giving and receiving in the chat? That would be an interesting thing to look at. So I have a bunch of charts that we're going to look at, but this is the important thing. Daemon represents and gives information about spiritual and intellectual matters. What's interesting about investigating this today is that pretty much after Bonatti, or maybe after like the 14th or 15th century or 16th century, really not even, because I was looking for it in Scherner, who's 16th century, and I really couldn't find it. Really, after Bonatti, the usage of the part of spirit kind of goes underground, or just isn't used at all, which is why we're now investigating it. So when I was looking for more varied resources, or what's the word I'm really looking for more varied resources, I couldn't find them. There wasn't anything after a certain point. So I'm going to use what I have. Of course, that doesn't mean that there's not more out there. And what I have obviously is relatively limited. So we're going to look at Vettius Valens, who's from the 2nd century. We're going to look at Abu Mashar and Al-Qabizi, who are from the 8th and 9th century. And then we'll look at Bonatti. And like I said, after that, there's not much talk about it. Matter of fact, there's almost nothing. because even as we continue on, the usage of the part of fortune becomes more corrupted. And when I first actually started with astrology in the 90s, there was only one formula for finding the part of fortune, and it was only the night formula, or maybe it was only the day formula. And we didn't know that you had to change it for night or day charts. And so I learned that through Rob Hand in the 90s, in the late 90s, when he and Robert Zoller and Robert Schmidt brought there was that whole renaissance of traditional astrology, and they're 100% responsible for it. And that's how we found out that, oh, wait, there's an actual, you have to switch depending on what kind of chart you have, or rather sect matters. So, okay, so here we're talking about that. It will be necessary to examine the places and the signs in which their house rulers are located and to correlate their natures, blah, blah, blah. Of course, that's what everything that we do. Nativities will be considered glorious, distinguished, and vigorous if they are from the sun and moon, and if benefics are in conjunction or inclined to these places or house rulers. So if they are from the sun and moon, I'd probably, that depending on position from the sun and moon, or they might even mean if they are if the rulers are the sun and moon, because they were considered to be the most powerful and potent. And this is the Hellenistic period, so they were considered to be the most powerful and potent at the time. If benefics are in conjunction or inclined to these places or house rulers, then and if benefics are in conjunction, right, or inclined to these places or house rulers. So that makes perfect sense. The nativities, please stop me if anything is not making sense. Of course, to Sapphira, none of this might be making any sense. So let's just come to one thing, is that we've come to understand that when we're looking at these things called lots, that they all have different things that they represent. And that the lot of fortune, which I showed on that chart, represents matters concerning the body, but also work, right, which we just talked about. But that the one that we're doing today, which there isn't really that much information about after the 13th century, is the one that gives information about spiritual and intellectual matters and about the activities of giving and receiving. So that's the most important thing to keep in mind for what it is that we are doing today. All right. So, and generally that's called a signification, right? We're looking at a signification of the lot of daemon, or part of spirit, or lot of spirit. Okay, that's what we're actually talking. So right now we're in the what the hell is it supposed to mean part. Okay, so now when we get into the second and the third paragraphs, then it's all about, oh, what this thing can do. Right? What's this thing? So first is what the hell is it about? Then the second thing is what the fuck is it supposed to be able to do? Well, if it's in the right place, nativities will be considered glorious, distinguished, and vigorous. If they are from the sun and moon, which we're still trying to figure the fuck out, which we don't really know. And I'm completely confessing that. I'm not really 100% sure what that means. And if benefics are in conjunction, which is something which is an astrology term that we'll come to, and which I'll show you, or inclined to these places. To be inclined to something means to more than likely either be to them or moving into them. See what I'm saying? So it's all of this kind of old language. Once you kind of got your bearings of knowing what's happening, it can be deciphered. But so right now we're in the whole why the hell should I look for it part, right? The first thing was what the hell does it do? Now we're in the why the hell should I look for it? And so it's supposed to help people to have glorious, distinguished lives. If so, then if it's in a certain place, if it's in the 10th house, which is one of those houses that we saw in that chart, then nativities are illustrious and distinguished, right? So this might be a reason to be looking at it. If it is in proper place or at another angle, the nativities will be as distinguished and vigorous as they can be under the circumstances. Now there's a whole thing kind of around that, because that's, for a slave, for a king, it's that kind of thing that he's actually referring to here. If it's turned away from its proper place, right? We're talking about retreat for those of you who've been in the classes. So we're talking about cadent houses, and we'll get to that in a second. If it's turned away from its proper place, right? So it's in a cadent house in that respect. It just precedes an angle, or has a maleficent aspect, right? We were just talking about it's a good thing if it's with the benefic planets who are Jupiter and Venus, but if it's with Mars and Saturn, then it's fucked. And so basically this is how astrology works in this time period. It's like, okay, this is what the thing's about. This is what the thing does. This, if it's like this, it's going to do it really well. If it's like this, it's going to be fucked. Right? So that's what where we are right now in our investigation. What is it? What does it do? Why should I be looking at it? Is it worth it? So in the 2nd century, that's what he had to say. When we come now, we look a lot of absence is what it's called. So he calls it demon or spirit. Vedic Valens calls it spirit, right? Once again, it's something you cannot see. You cannot see the spirit. This is called a lot of absence, something that you cannot see, right? Once again. So in the day from, okay, it tells us how to find it, which we're going to look at. And then does it say anything about what it's supposed to mean? Okay, and its proper quality is to signify the soul and body and its being, and it signifies faith and prophecy, religion and the honoring of God, and secrets and thoughts and intentions, and hidden and concealed matters, and everything of matters which is absent. Okay, so when we get to Bonatti, we're going to see this again, because of course Bonatti is the chronicler, right? And then we're going to be able to kind of parse it out and start looking at charts for these things. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll figure out how to find it, and then we will find them in a bunch of charts and see what we. And so what I've done, I've got a bunch of different types of charts. I've got Pope John Paul II, and who was very, very devout, and I've got Maciel, who was a complete fraud. I've got, I think Marilyn Monroe's in there. So I've got, Sylvia Plath is in there. So I've got someone with mental illness. I've got two gay porn stars. I've got, so we've got a really nice mix of different people. I've got Arturo Toscanini as well. And Kathleen Battle, the most hated woman in classical music, right? So we should, because it's not just what the person believes in faith and prophecy, but it's also secrets and thoughts and intentions and hidden and concealed matters and everything of matters which is absent. And praise and a good reputation and courtliness and generosity, also heat and cold. Bonatti copies this almost 100% when we get to him. All right. So now, speaking of the devil, we come to Bonatti. So I just want, the reason I put this part in is after the part of fortune which exceeds all the other parts in strength and fortune, right? And we just showed that on the chart. The part of things to come. Now he's talking about things to come or the future. Only a very rare person can see the future. It's, once again, we're dealing with the issue of the hidden, right? I think I might have do I have Ted Bundy or somebody in there? We might need somebody with secrets. Maybe Henry Kissinger. We should maybe look at Henry Kissinger or Ted Bundy or a serial killer or something, someone who's got secrets. Everybody has them, mind you, but there's this idea of something unseen, something that cannot be seen, but that is animated, right? This part of spirit. So we've seen with each different slide, we've seen a different title. We've seen demon or spirit. We've seen absence. We've seen future or things to come. So after the part of fortune, this is the most important. This immediately after the part of fortune exceeds and is more worthy than all the other parts, although some astrologers seem to care little about it. But it does not seem consistent to me, since it is reputed by the wise to be extremely useful for this work. This is what we are investigating today. All right, then he tells us how to find it. But the important thing I want to come to, what was that thing? Oh, did I talk about? Oh, I don't think I did. All right. Oh, here. Yes, we did. Okay. And so, as I mentioned, he basically says all of the same things that Abu Mashar did. Soul in the body after the part of fortune and their condition, and faith and prophecy, religion, and the cultivation of God, and secrets and thoughts and intentions, this and hidden things. Because remember, Balance said spiritual and intellectual matters, right? So that's so we've got it looks like we can trifurcate. It's talking about a person's faith, which of course no person knows, right? And their connection to religion as or their connection to God. It's talking about what's secret within a person, what is not shared between people, right? There's what we share with people, and then there's the way that we think. I mean, why do people kill themselves? Because what we see is not what they're experiencing, right? What we see of them is not what they're experiencing of themselves. Often the self-talk or whatever it is, the secret thinking, the stuff that is not shared is what kills them. And before we know it, we're at a funeral, right? So secrets, thoughts, and intentions. This is, in my opinion, the connection with the intellectual or the mind. And courtesy, liberality. So courtliness, that means to be in luxury. Liberality, that means to be in abundance. And praise and good reputation. All of that stuff is 10th house. And then Abu Mashar says, part of fortune and part of things appear more regarding every matter both absent and what is going to be than over what is present. I think that's interesting and important. He also says, is it down there? They also say somewhere that it shows up more in the charts of people whose lives are prominent. And so I think that's interesting. So everybody that we're going to look at today, their lives are prominent. Questions. We're at pretty much the end of the slideshow. So now we're going to get to the charts. And questions or comments? Nothing. Did anybody come up with another idea of something that involves giving and taking? Right? Because that's what we were looking. Activities of giving and receiving. Anybody besides sales? Besides sex, anybody come up with an idea of what that could be?
Teaching.
Teach. Oh, I love that. Great idea. Great. Fantastic. Teaching. Yes. What else?
Parenting, maybe?
Yeah. I don't see why not. I don't see why not. Um, Performing, huh? There's a giving and receiving aspect to that. Um, the bank teller. There's a giving and receiving. A prostitute. So anything where there's a transaction.
So like jobs in the service industries or things like that, maybe?
Sure. Well, I mean, it looks like it's larger than just that. Like what we're trying to figure out, I guess let me go back to the slides for a second. What we're trying to figure out is why does it, or rather what I'm trying to figure out is why does it contribute to this courtesy and liberality and abundance and praise and to glorious, distinguished, and vigorous. Now, vigorous is an interesting term. Notice that he says it again. Doesn't he say it again? Like someone will be vigorous. Yeah, distinguished and vigorous. That's a really interesting term because why do you think they use the term vigorous?
Going for their goals, really in tune, connected with whatever it is that they're, pursuing.
Excellent. That's good, but I don't think it's what I'm looking for. The sun represents life and vitality, and this is considered the lot of the sun. In a similar way, that the lot of fortune is considered the ascendant of the moon or the lot of the moon. So ultimately, the lot of fortune and the lot of spirit are representing the moon and the sun, respectively. So just like the part of father represents the fourth house, right? Now we've got the sun and the moon each have their lots. And so one of the things we also thought we would do today is we would look at, because each planet has a lot that's connected to it. So I thought we might, if we want to, we might choose to look at some of those as well. But so for me, now here's the other thing. Now I'm not, I can't say I'm cheating necessarily, but I've already been using the ruler of the lot of spirit once again, very integrally into this technique for finding fame, involving using the part of fortune as an ascendant. And so that's a system that I had already kind of established or set up a few years ago. But like I said, I've never kind of pursued it as a standalone point or place. And so what we need to, like, you've seen me do it time and time again with the part of fortune, right? You've seen, so I'm doing it all the time with the part of fortune, and it's always kind of lining up. So what we're looking for is what lines up when what is it that we can look to line up when we get to the charts. So is it the religion spiritual thing? Is it the mental spirit, the mental thinking intellectual? Is it a something that because I'll tell you, it is the, for those of you who know what zodiacal releasing is, then you do zodiacal releasing of the part of fortune for what's going to happen to the body. You do zodiacal releasing of the part of spirit for what's going to happen in the career and what will happen with. And once again, that's another solar signification. So this is, I think, another reason. I saw something very interesting in Formicus Maternus. So I was looking at Formicus Maternus to see if there was any more information, and there wasn't anything in there either. And that's not that much later. That's maybe 6th century, 5th century. And he was saying, he was saying that since the sun and moon rule holds, WHOLES, that they weren't as interested in individual significations, which I thought was very fascinating. But I don't want to get sidetracked into that particular thought for the moment. So let's skip Arturo Toscanini. I just wanted his because I didn't have it yet. But Kathy Battle was really the first person that I thought, if we're looking at the part of spirit, it should be giving an insight into their thinking. Yeah, into a secret part of them that animates them, right? The sun is the giver of life. So let's look and see. So first of all, let's figure out how to find it. Is this a daytime chart or a nighttime chart? Somebody help me.
Nighttime.
Thank you. So that means that the formula would change. If this were a daytime chart, we would start from the sun and move to the moon's position, and we would take that distance. But since it's a nighttime chart, we must go from the moon's position to the sun's position. Oh, that's to find the part of fortune. But guess what? To find the part of spirit, it is the opposite. So what I just described was the part of fortune. By daytime, starting at the sun and going to the moon's position. By nighttime, starting at the moon and going to the sun's position. However, this is different. We do it exactly the opposite. By daytime, we would go from the moon to the sun. By nighttime, we would go from the sun to the moon. So, as you can see, here's the part of fortune. So this should be a much smaller angle. This is almost 200. This is more than 270 degrees, right? Or more than 240 degrees. It shouldn't be that much. So what we're doing is we're going forward 120, 30, 60, 90, 120, or rather 30, 60, 90, 120, right? And minus 13, right? Because the sun is at 20 and the moon is at 7. So here's 30, 60, 90, 120. Brings us to 16 or 17 to the 17th degree of Libra. But now we have to go back how much? We have to go back 13, right? Because 20 minus 7, or yeah, 20 minus 7 is 13. So we have to go back 13. So now it brings us to 4 degrees of Libra. 4 degrees of Libra. 4 degrees of Libra, everybody. So 2 things are really, really interesting to me about that. Who rules Libra?
Venus.
Right. Who's on Libra, on the sign of Libra?
Are we looking at the outers?
We can. I mean, you can mention them. I mean, yes, you can mention it's Neptune and Mars, but I mean, I'm really paying the most attention to the inners. But yeah, definitely that's there too. But it's Mars. This woman was contentious and mean-spirited and nasty and difficult to work with, and no one liked her. She's the most hated woman in classical music. Mars represents contention and hate, right? Goddesses. So what we've got here too is we've got Mars in his detriment of Libra, right? So Mars is acting in Venus's realm. But we're not talking about what's out there in the world, right? We're not talking about what's out there necessarily in the world, or maybe we are. Let me stop that for a second. We're talking about what can't be seen. So what are our three areas? One of our areas was this person's spiritual belief and connection to God and religion and faith. The other one is what's going on in there that no one knows about or that isn't being shared. What's the secret? What's the thoughts? What's the point of view? So if we were to make a gander based on what's in there, what's in there that we can't see with this person, then one of the things that was known for her was that she had a kind of a paranoia. There was a or rather she wasn't really paranoid. She knew she was having problems, and so she would make ridiculous demands in order to kind of avoid the fact that she was having certain issues. And so, for instance, her chin started moving a lot while she was singing. I'm a singer, so I'm sorry I'm getting into this. And that's kind of a sign of bad singing in classical music. And so she started making demands that nobody could look at her chin, and so that she couldn't be looked at while she was singing. So this Mars Neptune, I mean, we can include the Neptune. Without the Neptune, we can see the combat is in there. That combat is in there. And that we know also from the other thing that we know about Mars when he's not in his own sign, like with Muhammad Ali and other fighters, is that often they will overcompensate and go too far in order to show that they really are that thing, right? But the most interesting thing about it is that, of course, Libra is the aesthetic aspect of Venus, right? And Venus is music and the arts, right? So that's another thing that all of a sudden tells us something. Notice that the Venus is 10 houses away from the part of spirit, right? And also, okay, notice also too that now the part of spirit is on the cusp of the second house of the voice, right? That's where the voice is. And Venus is beauty, right? So this woman had a beautiful, beautiful voice, known for having an extremely beautiful voice, right? So the beauty of even though we've got a mute sign on the second cusp, the Venus there, we have that with Leontine Price. She's got a mute sign, she's got Pisces there, but she's got Venus and Jupiter there and Mercury who rules the voice, right? So this can kind of override that particular mute thing, also looking at who the ruler of the second is as well. But that Mars on the part of spirit, this person was very, very combative. This person was very, can I bother you for a brief overview? Oh, certainly. Oh, I'm wondering, should I do the overview or yeah, let me do the overview. Actually, this is a perfect, yeah, thank you. I'm sorry that I even doubted whether or not I should do it. So this is because we're looking at a chart at the moment, and so it's perfect. Signs can represent things. Planets can represent things. Houses, these are all the slices of life. Houses can represent things. I'm hoping, and it doesn't really matter if you are or not, but I'm hoping that you're familiar with the signs, the planets, and the houses, right? So all of them by themselves represent certain things, right? And so I used as an example, and actually let's do that with this particular chart with the example. So I used as this example that let's say someone's asking about their father. So the significators for father in the traditional astrology are the fourth house cusp and the ruler, the sun by day, and Saturn by night, right? So any astrologer would look at the cusp of the fourth, they'd look at the sun. It's nighttime, rather. Well, in this particular case, they'd look at the sun because sun is the ruler of the fourth. They would also look at Saturn because Saturn is the significator for the father by night. Then they could also do something interesting by which they would find another thing to look at based on the distance between two significators. And so we already mentioned that the sun is the significator for father by day, and the Saturn is the significator for father by night. So we can create something called a lot or a part. And you may have heard of something called the part of fortune, right? So another term for that is lot of fortune, right? As in your lot in life, right? So what we can then do is we can use understanding that there are 360 degrees in a circle, right? And that all of this is being contained within that 360 degrees. And there are 30-degree slices. Each house is approximately a 30-degree slice that gives us our 12 houses. 12 times 3 is 360. That means that because what we're really looking at is distances between planets. Then, okay, so that's the first thing they would do. They would find the distance between the two significators. And then knowing that as the ascendant is the beginning of life. It's basically the birth of light. It's the birth of all life. It's the birth of the question. It's the birth of the beginning of the election. It's the birth of the native, right? It's the beginning. It's life. It's the house of life. Then what they would usually do, it doesn't specifically have to be, but they would usually project the distance that they had found between those two significators, right? In this case, the sun and Saturn, although in this case, we would do something different, and I'm going to talk about it. And they would project that distance from the ascendant. And that is essentially the lots. That is basically finding a lot. And so the lots were used in a similar way that the asteroids are used now. And they were used, we just looked at, for the subject that we're talking about right now, we just looked at, our first resource was from the 2nd century and was talking about it. These go back beyond the AD era. These go back into the BC era and to the Hellenized Greek, the Hellenized Egyptian period. They talk about Pedosiris, King Nechepso, and Pedosiris, his astrologer. The two of them were great astrologers, and that's some of the earliest references to this, and that takes place at least maybe 200 or 300 years before Vettius Valens, where he talks about the king. It's either King Nechepso or King Pedosiris, one or the other. But this stuff goes way, way back. And as I was mentioning, maybe before you got here, the thing that we're looking at today, after the 13th century, we stop hearing about it. We stopped looking at it. So we went into a whole hermeneutics of the resources of the texts of basically what does it do, why should we be looking for it, and is it worth our while? And so that's where we are now. Are you feeling up to
Yes,
yeah,
definitely. Thank you.
Yeah. So do you know about the part of fortune already, or is any of that, are you kind of with us? It sounds like you are.
No, I have not. No.
Okay. All right. So that's this thing right here. And
no, I saw that in the past, and I'm just thinking it's like a hazard sign or something.
Great. Well, no, that's so let's actually, I'm glad that you stopped me, because let's talk a little bit about why the part of fortune and the part of spirit, right? So this is the part of fortune. The one that we're looking for today is the part of spirit. As I've mentioned, week after week after week, people have seen me work with the part of fortune. Maria, are you the one that gave me the blind chart of the woman who was killing her patients? And I was able to guess that she'd been killing them just based on what was going on with the part of fortune. But
I think that was Layla. I think that was Layla.
Or Diana. I think it was either Layla or Diana. It was one of those. But you gave me one too. But anyway, but part of fortune. First of all, this thing is really important, and let's give Michelle and all of you actually, because I may not have really been hyper specific about why it is we're looking at it. So I have a favorite Vedic astrologer named Sanjay Rath. And he has a lot of fantastic videos on YouTube. And one of them, he talks about this yearly chart. This basically, it's a return chart called the Titi Pravesha. And he made a really, really important point. He said that, you know, the Western astrologers, they only look at the return of the sun, right? It's like the solar return is everything. But you can't have children without the father and the mother. And so it's not enough that you be looking at a solar return. You should be looking at when the moon returns to its exact position, not by sign, but there are lunar days, right? And so each lunar day is called a Titi. That's why it's called Titi Pravesha. And so, for instance, I was born on the 9th lunar day of the waxing moon when the sun was in Sagittarius. So basically, my birthday is when that happens again every year. So when the moon comes to the 9th lunar day of the waxing cycle, when the sun is in Sagittarius, that's when my solar return happens in Jyotish. So that's called the Titi Pravesha. And so he really bemoaned how there was this lack of reverence in Western astrology for the relationship between the sun and the moon, right? Which is what everything's about, right? The moon gets her light from him. Thus, what he didn't know, and of course it's because he probably only knows modern astrology, is that the part of fortune and the part of spirit are that place in every chart. They are that magic, they are that representation of the marriage of Shiva and Shakti, because the sun in Jyotish represents Shiva, and the moon in Jyotish represents Parvati, his consort. Thus, the sun and moon in their relationship is encapsulated within the part of fortune. So what do we do when we look at the part of fortune and the part of spirit? We find the distance between the two of them. And then we project that from the place of life. So in traditional astrology, one of the very first things you would do is you would figure out how long the person was going to live. And in order to do that, you would have to find this thing called the high leg. And then you'd find the high leg, you would find then another planet called the Alcocadon. The high leg basically is an indicator of life in the chart. Then you would find the planet that allots the years. Then you would find what they called the Lord of the Genitor, or the Lord of the entire life, the Lord of the entire chart. And that planet is the planet that has the most rulership in 5 different places. They're called the hylegical places, or places of life. The sun, the moon, the ascendant, the part of fortune, and the previous new or full moon in the chart. Those are the 5 hylegical places. So what I'm basically saying is that in the traditional period, there was a reverence for this relationship. Everything, all 5 of those places, except for the ascendant. But the ascendant is dependent on the sun, right? Because it's where the sun appears. right? So, but all of the other four are dependent on either, well, the sun and the ascendant are the only ones not dependent on the moon, but the other three are dependent on the relationship between the moon and the sun. So this is why, and we were just talking about, and I don't know, Michelle, if you were there when we were talking about how I was reading for Micah's was talking about how the sun and moon represent wholes, WHOLLES, wholes, right? The whole, not the parts, not the individual, but the wholes. So I think, so now are we all kind of together on why we're looking at this? As I mentioned, I've been looking at this place as an alternate ascendant, and it's been working, right? They've seen me do it week after week after week. But now we're looking at the other one, right? So the other thing that they call this is the ascendant of the moon. This is the part of fortune, the ascendant of the moon. Right now, we're looking for the ascendant of the sun, which would be the part of spirit. And that was found down here, right? So as I mentioned, if you're interested in looking at the part of fortune, I've got videos about it on the channel, and this will obviously go up on the channel as well. And I do a lot of that preliminary that you missed is in the beginning, but really you just got the whole thing right here, right now too. Because it's good to, even for the people who've been with me, to keep reiterating what it is we're looking at and why. Because that is really, if anything, I think now you understand why. I mean, obviously it said, oh, hey, these are the two most important. But why are they the two most important? It's because the relationship between the sun and the moon are everything. They regulate our entire life. Thus, the place where the part of fortune is and the part of spirit are representative of that relationship and have a special potency. So we've already talked about how the part of fortune is also the path to fortune. Right, that in the chart, the planet that rules it. We've looked at it with many, many different charts, and we've looked at also how the behaviors that are represented can show up during that time when we're in our work environment. I talked about how I've got Virgo as and I'm not really into signs, as you know, but I've never been what I consider a very organized person. But I have a Virgo part of fortune. And when I am in a work environment, I'm so fucking organized and methodical and creating process and streamlining and making things more efficient. I don't know where the fuck originally I didn't know where the fuck it came from. Now I do. So moving on, remembering 4 degrees of Libra is where the part of spirit is here. So we've done a lot of investigating of the part of fortune. We're happy with that. What we're investigating now is the part of spirit. And does it matter? Does it indicate? Does it track? Does it show up? And in my case, this really shows up in a lot of ways, because remember the 3, well, we haven't looked in one area, but remember the 3 areas we're looking at: the thoughts. Oh, so remember, like I said, just like the planets and the signs and the houses represent things, the lots represent things. The 3 things that this particular lot that we're looking for, not this one, but the one down here that we found, right? So the thing that represents is their faith and religion, their connection to faith and religion, their thoughts, what's secret within them, what we cannot see. Right, we had come to the understanding that all of the titles that had to deal with this lot were about what can't be seen. What was the first one? Daemon or spirit, which you cannot see. The second one was absence, right? That's the essence of that, right? And then the third one was futurorum, or that which is to come, things to come which cannot be seen, right? So we're looking for the unseen in this chart. But it's connected to the mind and the intellect and thought. So we're looking for the unseen person in the chart. What we can't, what isn't privy, what we're normally not privy to, possibly. So, I mean, and so maybe this would have been like if somebody had been looking at this woman's part of spirit and saw the Mars there, and knowing that Venus is the ruler. So I think this is really fantastic in my opinion, because the Mars right on the part of spirit, we were talking about how combative this person was, how much bad blood she created, right? Mars sheds the blood. She created a lot of bad blood. There were, many of the most famous opera singers in the world refused to ever work with her again. Like, she just showed her ass all the fucking time. And so I think that we've got the Mars, certainly. And look at that, the Mars is the ruler of the sixth. So the sixth is bad fortune. We know that she was finally fired for her negative attitude, for her bad attitude. She was finally specifically fired for, basically being so difficult, being rich. And so we see Venus with the music, with arts, right? This woman was a very fantastic singer, and a beautiful voice, and they're the part of spirit. So we can maybe see that the inclination toward the spirit, towards the voice and towards music, maybe, right? What's the spirit? What's inside there? It's Venus hour where I am right now. We're talking about it, and bam, the Venus hour just showed up. Maybe she's telling me I'm correct, right? But we can also see that there's Mars here to stir the pot, and that he's the ruler of the sixth. He's also the ruler of the 11th, so he can maybe make things happen. So this person might have been very ambitious, right? 11th house is the dreams I want to make happen, right? And Mars will go for them, right? But it's also the sixth house ruler, which is what goes wrong. And also the sixth house is Mars's joy. So Mars loves the battlefield. So there's a very strong possibility that she turned every environment into a battlefield, right? That she turned it into there was no harmony. There was no harmony, right? People are saying they'll never work with you again. Then there's no harmony. Questions?
I want to ask,
Absolutely.
since she became kind of like a renowned person, where in her part of fortune or her part of spirit allowed for her to rise to fame in that way?
That's outside. Unfortunately, that's outside of the realm of what we're talking about today. So I'm not gonna go into that today. I'm basically just going to look at, and I don't think it's the part of spirit that does it. And so that's in my opinion, the reason, because there really is, if we go back to the chart, there really is not necessarily, well, there's one thing that could show us maybe that the Venus is 10 houses away from the part of spirit itself, right? And the part of fortune is in the 10th. But I'm going to say it right now, don't fall for those things. It needs to be looked at. It needs to be looked at more in a much more specific manner.
I guess I was trying to understand it better, but now that you say it's not involved, I guess I focus on something else.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it is supposed to be one of those things, right? It's one of the three areas we're looking at. And in this particular case, we do see that the Venus is 10 houses away. All of these people are prominent, and we're not always going to see that. Do you see what I'm saying? We're going to see a different thing with each chart. So, in my opinion, the technique that I discovered that I'm not going to share today is better at that question, which is why I'd rather move it outside of that. And it has to do with the connection between what's going on with the part of fortune and where things are placed. Tammy was raising her hand. Was that Tammy I was talking to already, or did Tammy also have a question?
No, I just raised my hand. Hi, hello, good afternoon.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you. Sorry, I was a bit late, and I wasn't sorry. Yeah, so I wanted to know, like, are there paid classes that I can attend, because I really want to learn, but this is my first time attending this session, and I'd like to know, like, is this something that happens every Sunday? Like, how does it work?
Great question. Yeah, great question. This is an ongoing free Zoom study group that I've been doing for almost 2 years.
Oh,
and so
okay.
you're welcome to join us. And also thank you for asking, because it gives me an opportunity to plug. So I have a YouTube channel on which are all of the videos that I do here. It started with a traditional astrology course that I basically wanted to create a paid course, and decided to do a regular, just to do a regular course, or a pilot course on a weekly basis. And so that is available on the YouTube channel. And so I'll put a link to the YouTube channel in the chat a little bit later. And if you give me your email address, then I can, and that's for all of you who are new kind of to me today. Thank you so much for coming. That's for all of you. If you give me your email address, I'll put my email address in the chat. You can either send me an email or you can put the email in the chat. And then I'll put you on my mailing list, which announces what we're going to be looking at every week. And so what I would suggest is to go to the very first video in the traditional astrology course, which is called the Ascendant and Personal Happiness. And so it basically, thank you, Michelle. And so it basically talks, the first like 5 lessons of the course kind of bring you into everything in an extremely systematic way. And of course I'm available for and I've got some paid courses coming up that I'm not going to announce just yet, but definitely I've got an ongoing what I am going to have is an ongoing study group where we look at one book. I know that like Venusian has been looking at some books, and I thought if people want to actually attack a book together, a text together, and pull it apart, then I'm interested in doing that with some people. And then also I'll be teaching a horary class coming up soon. But for those of you who are new and who are like, what the fuck is he talking about? What the hell? My head is spinning. There's my YouTube channel is a huge resource for traditional astrology, for systematic learning of astrology. Please avail yourself of it, and I will put the link in the chat. Oh, wonderful. Thank you, V. Thank you, Venusian. So, yeah, so if there are any more questions about... So, Tammy, would you give me an idea of where you are with astrology right now? She's still with us. Oh, I think she told me she's kind of just beginning or whatever. So great. Well, thank you all for coming. And so so as you can see, the material that we're looking at is quite advanced, right? It's away from, what the signs mean or what the planets mean. There isn't shall we say, there's an expectation or an assumption that we already know those things, right? That we already know those things. And so some of the things that I've also done on the YouTube channel is I've got a playlist that's all the classical planets and all of the houses, right? And so that you can I basically just kind of want to create a really good systematic resource for people to be able to come and learn astrology. Learn astrology, not, that doesn't have anything specifically to do with the psychology of behavior, even though that's something that the part of spirit is allowing us to do. So, because the secret, the hidden, the thoughts, the intentions, which the part of spirit is supposed to be helping us to uncover. And remember, the sun is the all-seeing eye. And also remember that it was connected to faith and prophecy. And one of the things that we tend to forget in this modern era is that the sun is the ruler of healing. The sun is the ruler of divination. The sun is the ruler of prophecy. The sun is the ruler of psychic phenomenon, because the sun is the all-seeing eye, right? It's the eye in the sky. It's the all-seeing eye, right? The sun and the moon are the eyes in the sky. And they each represent the right and the left eye in a man, and the left and the sun represents the right eye in a man, and the moon represents the right eye in a woman, and vice versa for each sex, right? So there's already a connection with the eyes and that as well. So keep that in mind, and that's why the connection between the 9th house, which is the joy of the sun and called God, because the sun is God, and the sun is religion, and the sun is divination, and the sun is prophecy, and the sun is healing. So keep that in mind. And then the moon is what rules over all earthly matters, right? We've established she's the co-ruler of all things, right? Because she's the mediatrix between the celestial realm and the earthly realm. And so she transmits the celestial influences down and makes shit happen. So that's really what we're looking at, right? That's really what we're looking at. But in this particular case, like I said, I'm going to skip that particular question and continue with what it is that we've been looking at. So this is another opera singer. I wanted to, first of all, I wanted to have some musicians to see if it turned out that there was some kind of musical related thing. And interestingly enough, if anybody remembers when we talked about signs, was it last Thursday or the Thursday before, we talked about how the signs of attractive voice are the air signs. And Libra is, and look at how the part of fortune and the part of spirit were both in air signs. The air signs in Virgo are the signs of attractive voice. And so this woman had a very attractive voice. And then, of course, Venus is beauty, and she's right on the cusp of the second house. So this is also one of the most beautiful male voices of the century. We talked about him when we talked about in the video on the moon's role in the natal chart, right? Because from all this stuff that I've been reading, I started realizing that, hey, maybe we shouldn't be looking at the moon differently in the natal chart than we do in horary and electional. And maybe its effect is just as important. And it can because ultimately the moon's role in a chart, for those of you who are new, in the traditional understanding, the moon's role in any chart is one of the most focal and important points, because once again, she's what makes things happen. So if the moon herself is in a really bad condition, then it affects how everything else can happen. It will affect her mojo to be Lady Luck, right? So luck, be a lady tonight, right? That's the moon. We're talking about the moon as Lady Luck. She is the roll of the dice, right? So if she is in fucked up condition, then she's going to affect how everything can happen, how things can happen. She is the co-ruler of all matters. So that's also a video on the YouTube channel. The moon in traditional astrology and the role of the moon in natal astrology. I did them back to back. And so that'll give you an idea. All of this is very disconnected from any of the, certainly those of you who are with me, those of you who are new to me, like Tammy, etc., then the idea of the geocentric versus anthropocentric is a very important distinction that I really perceive modern astrology to be anthropocentric or human-centered or person-centered. But this astrology that we look at is geocentric or earth-centered, which is all about how do things come to pass and whether they do or not, what comes to pass, in what way does it come to pass, etc. But this particular thing we're looking at, the part of spirit, is actually anthropocentric on some level, right? Because we're looking at what's the secret inside of this person. So let's look. So we see that the part of fortune is here. So we more than likely know when the part of fortune is in the first house, then we have a new moon. When the part of fortune is in the seventh house, then we have a full moon. Okay, so just keep that in mind. When the part of fortune is in the first house, we more than likely have a new moon. Indeed, we do. It's nighttime, another nighttime chart. And we would take the distance from the moon to the sun. This is for the part of fortune, right? Because by day, we take the distance of the sun to the moon. And by night, we take it from the moon to the sun. And then, so once again, for those of you who are just kind of coming with me, all kinds of things can be representative, and distances between significators can be representative as well. And so we would almost always project that distance from the house of life, the beginning of light, the beginning of life, which is the ascendant. So in this particular case, it's nighttime. To find the part of fortune, right, we would go from the moon's distance to the sun, which is a little more than 3 degrees. And indeed, it's a little bit more than 3 degrees here, right? 17 degrees. Ascendant is at 14. The part of fortune is at 17. Now, we know since it's a new moon, there's only 3 degrees away. The part of spirit will be here. It'll be at around 11 degrees. Let's just put it in the 11th degree of Aquarius. All right, so that means that Saturn's in charge of everything. Saturn's in charge of what goes on with the life. Saturn's also in charge of what happens, of what's going on in the person, right, inside the person. And what I think is interesting is how Saturn is in Virgo, and he's part of the detriment of Jupiter here. So Jupiter is in his detriment and retrograde and with a malefic. So he's really oppressing this Jupiter. But the other thing about it is that Franco Corelli had one of the most amazing voices, was one of the best singers of the 20th century. He was one of the most self-critical people. He was a complete basket case. We used him when we were looking at the whole issue with the moon, but he was a complete basket case, and his wife was one of the worst culprits. He was hypercritical, and then his wife was super hypercritical on top of it, and they just created this horrible feedback loop that created all this anxiety, and he was horrible to work with because of that. And so I thought it would be an interesting thing. I was expecting the spirit to take us back to here, but it didn't, because that we were really saying, oh God, that would certainly make everything not so enjoyable, right? But instead, we come to this Saturn, who also can make things unenjoyable. What house does he rule? He rules the first, he rules the 12th. All right, so he rules the 12th house. Now, the 12th house we already know is what? The house of self-undoing. Right? This is the house of self-undoing. So this person would be highly critical. This person would be highly pessimistic. I mean, he would be in the middle of a performance. He'd come off stage and he'd be like, I can't continue. I'm going to go. I can't go on. It's terrible. I'm singing like shit. People said that he'd be singing the most beautiful, amazing thing, and he'd stop in the middle and be like, oh, that was horrible. I just can't do it. 12th house. Hypercritical. Pessimistic. We'll never make it. That's Saturn. We're doomed. Half empty, Saturn. So we've got this Saturnian nature, right? So with Aquarius rising, you got to be careful, because Saturn is the ruler of the 1st and the 12th. So the self-undoing will come with it. And Saturn is already depression, right? You know, he's already pessimism and depression and wailing and lamentations, right? So, and look at how we've got him opposing the Mercury. So he's affecting the rational mind as well. And the rational mind, Mercury is in Pisces, right? So the rational mind, Mercury, is in Pisces. He's fallen. So he's basically like, this is a basket cases chart. This is a basket cases chart. So he's going on the flow of the emotion, of his own emotions. Fascinating. Shows it in a completely different way that I hadn't even thought about. Now, what about, she asked about, once again, I'm not gonna use it for, how high, because look, where is it? It's in the 1st house, and the ruler is in the 8th. It's with Jupiter. But notice how I said Saturn is oppressing this Jupiter. Notice what houses Jupiter rules in this chart. Excuse me. He rules the 2nd of the voice, and he rules the 11th of my future hopes and wishes, and the 10th house of my career and my kingdom. So the Saturn is oppressing it, and it makes so much sense. Both of these planets are in really quite difficult condition. Oh, there's Tammy. Wow. So this is so far our investigation. Maria, what do you think?
I don't know. I feel like it's interesting that he was, so talented, and yet I don't know. It's just, I don't understand how the Saturn can be so strong if the Jupiter's there.
Well, but the Jupiter is weak. Look at how weak the Jupiter is.
Yeah.
Right? And remember,
they're both retrograde though.
They're both, but which is a detriment, which is an impediment.
Yeah.
Right? Which means that the Saturn will be meaner. He'll be worse. See, I think in my opinion, it's when I talk a lot about knowing what we're looking at. And if anything, that's what I really feel like looking at these, kind of coming to these Bonatti things most lately has helped me, has really done for me, is that it's all about being able to identify what's good and what's not so good. What's in good condition, right? We know that when a planet is essentially dignified, they're in good condition, and the opposite, right? That's one condition. So as far as looking at this Jupiter, this is a good point, especially for the newish people who might not really know kind of what we're talking about. So essential dignity refers to how a planet how a sign strengthens a planet, or how a planet is strengthened by sign occupancy, by occupying a sign. And so all planets are strengthened when they are in the signs that they rule or that are their domiciles. So in Jupiter, we're going to just use Jupiter here for a moment, because it brings us to a really good point. So looking at the Jupiter here and thinking about what's going on with my expansion or my wealth, right? And like it's in the 7th house, so shouldn't that mean that I attract a lover? And isn't it also my husband and blah, 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 and all that bullshit, right? Okay, so instead what we're going to do is we're going to see, well, how much mojo does this Jupiter actually have? So Jupiter rules Sagittarius and Pisces. The opposite of those signs would be signs in which Jupiter would be weakened. So Sagittarius is the opposite is Gemini. The opposite of Pisces is Virgo. Jupiter is in Virgo. The first 3 impediments in the 146 considerations that we were talking about are cadency, retrogradation, and combustion. Jupiter is retrograde. Then number 5, I think, or number 4 is the planet in conjunction, square, or opposition to a malefic? So Jupiter, in this particular case, what do you think? Not so good, right? Jupiter is retrograde. Jupiter is detriment. Jupiter is really, Saturn is applying to Jupiter.
Oh, right, because they're both retrograde.
Right, and Saturn is slower, and Saturn's at a higher degree. So Saturn is applying to Jupiter, which means that, bam, that don't look so great for Jupiter.
Mm-hmm.
And then, how much can Jupiter really help Saturn? Very little.
Yeah, I guess not. Not at all.
Very little, right? Because Jupiter himself doesn't have the power. So this is the difference between pessimism winning and optimism winning. Had the Jupiter maybe been closer, right? This is the ruler of the spirit. This is the ruler of the person's spirit, the Saturn in this case. And notice that the ruler of the person's spirit is opposing the conscious rational mind, which is already fucked because it's in the sign of its fall. So this person isn't thinking rationally. Already, we know that. And we can also see that it's not part of what doesn't make it think rationally is it's always seeing the worst and always in the most horrible criticism of itself. It's judgment. And of course, Saturn. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Do we know if he had an anxiety disorder? Like was he actually diagnosed? Because
he was not. So he was singing in the 50s and 60s. So there probably was no such thing as a diagnosis at that point. But I'm sure he did.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm sure I'm sure we can, if we look at him now, it's a classic. We were talking about a guy who would, in the middle of a performance at the Metropolitan Opera, would walk off stage and be like, I can't continue. His wife would have to talk, or his wife would berate him the minute he got off the stage. So it's just all this weird, crazy, like just how he kind of perpetuated. Remember, Saturn is dread. Saturn is what we do not enjoy. We try so hard to kind of wash Saturn clean of what's negative and try to make him something that we can like, but we're not supposed to enjoy him. He's labor and work, right? So when he's in a good condition, then we don't necessarily hate what we're doing, right? But when he's in bad condition, that he can make us hate what we're doing.
Do you see what that Mars is doing to that Jupiter as well?
Mars applying to it by trine. But I think that I see that less. If it were a square, I would think it were worse.
Right. But Venus is sitting. Yeah.
Yeah, and also it's because it's with Venus, and remember that Venus and Jupiter are the rulers of Pisces. So Mars in this case could be representing the force of this person's voice because it was a forceful voice. And because Venus and Jupiter are the rulers of Pisces, which represents the 2nd house. Note that Mercury, the significator for the voice, is there too, right? So, and note also that Saturn is in Mercury's sign, which represents the voice, and opposing that planet that's in the second house. And then, as you mentioned, the exaltation ruler and the Mars are both applying to the Jupiter as well, which is
And
the
they're both
voice.
in retro, and Venus is in retro rather as well.
Okay, so
And
then she's
Jupiter's
not
alive.
applying. So just Mars. Right. So just Mars would be applying then. But so maybe that's like, once again, the forcefulness, the virility of this man's voice. Extremely virile, forceful. Animal was a voice that they called it animal. They called the voice animal, which makes sense
Did he
with
have like a
Aries.
growl to his voice, like a grit and like a growl to his voice, or was it just very...
No. So in opera, we don't like that. No grit or growl. More like a vibrancy, a vitality, a vibrancy, a beauty. The voice was fucking beautiful. Vibrant, major control, but there's like an animal vibrancy to the voice. Maybe I'll find a YouTube thing and put it in the chat so you can get a chance to hear him. Yeah, this is one of the 5 most important tenors of the entire century. So it gives, so it's showing only 2 charts, but it's tracking. Okay, now here's Johnny Depp, and one of the reasons I put this in here was because I had a dream about Johnny Depp on the first night that I was in India, and I always had I didn't really know anything about him personally, but I always had a good understanding, or thought good things about him. But I've come to understand that this guy is actually, he's best friends with Marilyn Manson, who it's turned out to be like a horrible abuser, a rapist, a trafficker, has abused many different girlfriends, etc. And then it's turning out, just from stories I've heard about Johnny Depp, that he's kind of an asshole. He's not just kind of an asshole, but also anger problems, etc. So one of the first things I think is interesting is look at how the Mars is opposing the part of fortune. Right. So there's anger issues with this person. Also, there's cholera on the ascendant. So cholera meaning hot and dry. So hot and dry is of the choleric temperament. All of the fire signs are hot and dry, and so are Mars and the Sun. Those are the hot and dry choleric planets and signs. And so we've got cholera rising, we've got Sun in Gemini, which makes perfect sense. Now let's see, so we've found the part of fortune. Let's see if we can find the part of spirit. Note also that the part of fortune is in a sign ruled by Mars. Mars is opposing the part of fortune. I thought that's interesting. And this guy's got violence and anger problems. Okay, so blah, 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 blah. We're looking for it's daytime for our first day chart. So instead of finding the sun to the moon, we find the moon to the sun. And so that's going to be 150 degrees, 30, 60, 90, 120, 150 plus 5. So let's do that. 150 plus 5 is, so, and we project that distance from the ascendant once again. So that brings us to 12 plus 5 is 17. 17 degrees or 18 degrees of Capricorn. Now, what I think is interesting about this is that we've got the moon who's quicksilver and changeable, right? The moon who's about moods and quicksilver, but quicksilver and change. And so one of the things that I've always respected about him as an artist is that he's a kind of a shapeshifter. He can kind of change. Like I respected him because I always felt like I had no idea who he was, right? And that's the highest compliment you can give an actor. Right? An actor, you're not supposed to know who they are. I mean, there are actors who make a career of being who they are, right? But there are other people that don't do that. And so I always perceive Johnny Depp to be this kind of invisible shapeshifter that can be almost anything, and I have no idea who he is. And so I like that with the moon on the part of spirit there. Note that the moon is with K2. And we've talked about K2 and about the South Node or the K2 and about the disillusionment and the headlessness, right? Because K2 is the tail of the dragon, so that the person can act in a headless manner. And it can chop things off at the head. And so we've got 2 indications that are interesting here. First of all, the moon is in Capricorn, which can dry up her water, right? Capricorn is an earth sign which is cold and dry, right? And so it can basically dry up her flow. It can stop her flow. And then so that can kind of cut emotions off at the head, or cut it, because the moon is where our ability to empathize. I mean, Jupiter is compassion, but the moon is our ability to feel, etc. And look at how there's that square between Jupiter and the moon. I didn't even see that. But okay, the moon here is about our emotions, our reactions, our responses, and there would be a coldness to it. It's ruled by the Saturn, who's cold and dry and in his own sign. So this would make the person probably maybe very, in my opinion, very serious about the things that they pursue and serious about the things that they do, but it might make them impatient with other people that they don't feel are as serious. It might make them demanding and stern. It could make them stern. This person can have a sternness to them. That because this is now the ruler of the spirit, like we just had. We had a Saturn spirit that was fucking things up. And notice where the ruler of the spirit is. It's in the 7th house. We just had a court case, 7th house, that had to do with a relationship, 7th house, which had to do with a age disparity, Saturn in the 7th house. So maybe we could say that part of the inclination, the internal inclination, and we talked, remember one of the terms I used for Saturn was oppress. Maybe there is a thing about oppressing others, or making others do the things that we want, or making others fit to our standard, right? That there's a standard that we have. There's an exacting standard, right? Saturn's in his own sign. So this person should be an authority, or may see themselves as an authority, right? So, and it's angular. So this authority, more than likely, this person is highly, highly talented and highly skilled and technical in their skill. You know, acting is a skill. It is a technical, it's just as technical as being a classical singer, right? And so if you've got a person who's really into acting, and you see this all the time, is that true? Okay, thank you. And he is an actor. And so if he isn't really truly an actor, then he's about method, he's about technique, he's about craft. And so when Saturn in Aquarius, there's another famous favorite opera singer of mine has Saturn in Aquarius, and I think she's the ruler of the part, it's a ruler of the part of fortune. And she is the example of breath control. And Saturn is an air planet, and Aquarius is an air sign. She is the example of control of breath. And so this person might be the example of something, or that would be what they would strive inside them. They would seek to be the example that other people would follow. That would be the authority on the subject. And so that would then, that kind of, once again, there can be a fundamentalism about how we go about things. There can be a sternness. There can be a lack of patience with those that don't measure up, right? So I think that in the retrogradation, there can be one of the things they talked about with him was moodiness, how moody, there's the moon on the spirit, how moody he was, how you never knew where he was going to be, and he could go off in any minute. I forgot about that. And so anyway, so this one, and note that, okay, so for those of you who've been with me on the Thursdays, this is an example of not so good reception. So the moon is applying to the square of Jupiter, which could be useful. Jupiter is in Aries, which is technically its triplicity, but I don't generally tend to use that since it's day. But it's squaring a benefic, right? However, the moon is in Capricorn, which is the fall of Jupiter. So that means when she pushes, she's going to push Jupiter's fall onto him, which means that can't really be that useful. So that basically what I'm saying is, if compassion lies with Jupiter, when Jupiter is in fall, he's not going to have so much access to it. So more than likely, I mean, this person enjoys interpersonal and romance, but note that all of that stuff is squaring the ruler of spirit. This person wants to dominate, wants to be the authority, wants to oppress, wants to dominate. So Note how all of that stuff is affecting it. Note how this changeable, fickle moon and the K2 are on top of the spirit as well. Shit is tracking. Questions before I move on?
He was this right here tells me that he's very, very particular. Did you see it? That really,
yeah.
like, not just moody, but extremely particular. Like, ooh, and I don't think he's very tidy either. Yeah.
Yes, that's what he would use to oppress. How particular? Because it's the devil is in the details. They say that's this chart all over. Yes.
Right, and it's like a peculiarity that comes with that particularness. Like, it's not even things that like the average mind would be bothered by. it's
no
super out there. It's weird.
I agree. I agree with you. And once again, so what I think what's been interesting. I mean, we only looked at 3 charts or 4 charts so far, but what's been really interesting so far has been looking at what planets are being aspected by the ruler of the part of spirit, right? So in that last chart, we saw how the mind was being affected by the part of spirit, by the ruler of the spirit. And in this chart, we can see specifically how the interpersonal and intimate relationships are being affected. And it's being confirmed by both it being in the 7th and being square Venus. And he's played peculiar characters. Right, and Saturn is known for being kind of out there and weird and strange. Or has he played tramps? Has he ever played? Because tramps belong to, beggars and tramps belong to Saturn.
Well, Pirates of the Caribbean was him kind of playing a tramp. Like he was a pirate. Kind of out there.
Yeah, so Saturn and Saturn rules ships, so it makes sense. Saturn would rule the bark or the ship or those big ships that we would sail the 7 seas on. So definitely.
Right.
Yeah, he was in a movie called Chocolat where he was a gypsy. Is that similar?
Oh, that's right. I love Chocolat. That's right. And he's once again ships.
Yeah.
What were you just going to say? Someone else was going to say something?
No, I was in agreement. I was just about to, yeah, she pulled words right out of my mouth.
And note that Pisces is on the part of fortune. The ships, which would make the Mars the ruler of the 9th from the part of fortune, Scorpio, water. So he's done a lot of things that have been around water. But he's best known for, you're right, the Pirates of the Caribbean. He's known for Chocolat. I loved him in that. Yeah, he's another one supposedly. No one can enjoy it when they're working with him. Supposedly, he's another one, makes everything difficult. The particularity.
I can see that, though. Like, that right there stands out to me. Like, this makes me think of somebody that I know who would be like the most unusual things, like things that the majority of the people would not think about.
And the problem is that fame would enable that.
Yes.
So it would enable and it would engender that kind of an eccentricity. That's the worst thing about it. So
that's
yeah.
The word.
That's a very good point. Very, very good point. Fantastic. Okay, moving on to Maciel. So now we're moving into looking at the part of spirit to represent their faith. Okay, so faith and religion. And so, like I said, I've got 2 charts. One is Maciel, who was a serial abuser. It basically was a charlatan who used the church. He was a priest, but he had no true religion, no true belief in God or the religion. He basically used it for money, for prestige, for power, and for a steady stable of boys that he could rape, and women, and children, and whatever. And then we're going to look at John Paul II, who was very devout, very sincerely devout, and see if there's what kind of difference we may see. Note that the part of fortune is in the 9th house of religion, of God, right? 9th house is God, right? So already the part of fortune is there. So we already know. And then also notice that the ruler of the 11th is there on the cusp of the 9th. So this person's future wishes and also the ruler of the 2nd right? This guy is he is the greatest fundraiser in the history of the modern church. Okay. This is the greatest fundraiser and one of the most prolific pedophiles in the history of the modern church. So let's see. So we've seen that the fortune is up there in the ninth, right? So that it's daytime. So that was the distance between the sun and the moon. So now we're looking for the distance between the moon and the sun. And 0 Sag to 0 Pisces would be 90 degrees. So we add another 20. So 90 degrees to for the sun, from Leo, is 8 degrees of Leo. Plus 20 brings us to 28 degrees of Leo, which is very, very close to Regulus, the fixed star. So one of the things about Regulus is that it's supposed to represent it precipitates a very, very great rise and a great fall. Now that's interesting in my opinion, because remember that this person gained all of this wealth, gained all of this prestige. Regulus, regu means king, right? Regno means king. So Regulus is the kingmaker, right? And so this guy was made like a king and was a kingmaker himself. Now, what's really interesting to me about this is that so the spirit is at, oh wait, no, I'm sorry, it wasn't on Regulus. I'm sorry about that. My fault, my bad, not on Regulus. 29 degrees of Leo was where Regulus was. And so I didn't bring things forward. So sorry, scratch everything I said about Regulus, my mistake. What's more important, in my opinion, is that this man had secrets. We were looking at something about secrets. The fourth house is the house of secrets. Scorpio is about the occult, right? The part of the body that Scorpio represents, we hide. You do not see, right? That's where the word occult comes. Occult means hidden, right? So we've got Scorpio. We've got the ruler of the spirit. We've got the spirit in Scorpio with the ruler of the spirit in Scorpio. So secret. Then the fact is that this guy created an order. He created a religious order called the Legionnaires, the Legion of Christ. And he did everything along strict military lines. Hierarchy, super hierarchical, super military, hyper disciplined. And one of the most important rules was that you could not, what was the word? It was basically used as it was basically an abuse of this issue of charity, was that you couldn't criticize your superiors. You couldn't criticize or say anything bad or wrong about your superiors. So he and a bunch of his other priests were raping all of these boys that became legionnaire priests. And then they kind of created this kind of multi-generational weird, and they've ruined different, I mean, it's just amazing kind of what the destructive thing, and there's Mars, destruction, the destructive thing that Maciel was able to create with the Legion. Very super traditional, super disruptive, and wanting to take over. Wanting to take over everything. When they come into, I was singing for a Roman Catholic church in Texas, and they talked about how the bishop made sure that the legionnaires could not come in, but because whenever they came into any kind of diocese, they would try to take over everything. And so this really it tracks, and also
that's close to his Rahu, right?
Yes, and so Mars Rahu on top of it. So there's the insatiable appetite, right? There's the ambition, the insatiable appetite for ambition. There's the violence. This guy, rape is violence, right? This is a person who was not only raping like his seminarians, but around the time that he was denounced, they found out that he had two different families with two different women, and he had been raping the children of that family. Like, this man is a complete, and certainly Mars and Scorpio at his worst can be this bad. Look at how Mars in Scorpio is coming to the square of the Mars to the Jupiter. So kind of like what did she say? Kind of like Maria just said, shouldn't the Jupiter help? What would this Jupiter help with?
Being able to exploit.
Yeah, what does he rule?
8th place.
8th and the 5th. So this Jupiter would enlarge the appetite for pleasure. And then he would also enlarge the appetite for hidden pursuits. This guy, we can see from this that this guy got off on not getting caught. He got off on the how the pomp and got off on how all the pomp hid all of the other shit.
I know we don't normally talk about Neptune, but do you think Neptune's kind of helping him hide stuff or maybe dissuade like what he was doing?
Sure. It's right there with the Jupiter. It's in the first house. It's angular. Sure. And maybe we can even think that the Neptune is helping them because remember the first house is also our mind, right? It's our head, right? So this person
making him delusional, maybe.
Yes, this person
he's doing the right thing.
Idea. Right. So Jupiter is the lofty, the sun, Leo is God. This person had lofty religious ideals that were deluded, but they were really delusions. They say I think I was telling you all that the last time we looked at this chart, when he died, they offered him the last rites and he refused them. So let's look. So one of the things also when we're looking at this as far as what is the person's belief, it brings us to the ruler of the 9th. Right? The part of spirit is in Scorpio. It's at 28 degrees of Scorpio. Mars is there. So secrets, and remember it's in the 4th house of secrets with the ruler of the 4th. And the other thing that I find so interesting, oh shit, I just forgot what I was going to say. It's in the spirit. The spirit is with Mars. Mars rules when it comes to the 9th house. Mars rules 2 things. He rules pilgrimage. And one of the interesting things is that Maciel is the person who sponsored the Pope's trips to Mexico's both times that he went. And then he also represents dissent, religious dissent, right? Because Mars is not about harmony. Mars is when there's contention, right? And so when we don't agree, right? When we are not in agreement, Mars is present. And so here we have Mars, the ruler of dissent, in the house of secrets, acting as the Lord of secrets. And so we know really what this person really, and also look that we've got Mercury on the cusp of the 9th. What this person really believed in was secrets and money. This person got off on abusing because he had been siphoning off money as well. This person was a drug addict. This is one of the most interesting biographies ever, period. This is one of the most interesting biographies that this person was given allotted the karma to destroy so many people's lives and get so high and be a right-hand person to the Pope. Outrageous. Such an important chart. But really, and I think the Mars Rahu definitely shows the outsized, outrageous secrecy. The ruler of the 8th with Mars helps to hide it. So we've got fear and terror on the ascendant, but it looks like religious benefit. We've got fear and terror that looks like religious benefit.
I wonder if he ever told the truth, like literally, if he even knew the difference between the truth and a lie.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah, I think that's note that Mercury, who rules the tongue, is trining that Jupiter.
Right.
So very possible that he did not. And the moon is applying to the Mercury and the Jupiter, right? So those are both aspects of mind, right? And they're both with that Jupiter, kind of coming at that Jupiter Neptune. So, Jupiter, remember, Jupiter inflates. So this is a self-inflated person. This person was highly inflated. and had to live in the lap of luxury. Like I said, he was embezzling so much money from his own organization, living so luxuriously, and a huge drug habit, expensive drug habit, and
Look at
sex
Venus
addiction.
7th.
Say that again. Venus in the 7th.
Look at Venus on the 7th in opposition to that Neptune Jupiter.
It's a little wide, but it's separating, so I wouldn't necessarily use it. But yeah, but certainly by sign, and Venus Jupiter, I call too much of a good thing. So
right, too much, entirely too much. He was doing the most. Oh,
exactly. All right, let's move on. Go to Pope John Paul. Okay. So the part of fortune is in the ascendant in Scorpio. So maybe now we see why he liked him so much, huh? Part of fortune on this guy's part of spirit and on the ruler of the spirit. We can see why he chose Maciel. And because remember,
their Rahus look like they were close.
The Rahus, well, they're I think just a few months apart. They're 1920. They're both 1920. Yeah, and so Rahu's in the sign for 18 months, or about 18 months. So yeah, so that makes perfect sense. So yeah, so even that you got, so his part of fortune is on Maciel's part of spirit, and ruler of the part of spirit. Important. Actually, it's even closer to the ruler of the part of spirit, right? So there's a connection there already right now, right? And so let's see, part of fortune. So that means that if the part of fortune's in the first house, that means it's a new moon. And indeed, the moon's only 5 degrees away from the sun, and it's daytime, so we went 5 degrees forward from the ascendant, which brought us to 27 degrees. And now we move 5 degrees away, and that brings us right to about 23 degrees of Libra, right onto the Mars. And so one of the things that he did was he fought against modernity. Oh, I want to make a point, just kind of a general point. So I may talk about things in a chart, and I might say things about something that you also have in your chart. And I see this come up a lot with me, or just generally. People say, oh, you said so and so and so, and I have that in my chart. And so, I was blah, blah, blah. So actually, this is my advice in that circumstance. Whenever anybody, not just me, whenever somebody mentions something that is also in your chart, the very first thing that you should actually be doing is say, how is my chart different from the chart he's talking about? Right? So I'm talking about Jupiter, Venus being blah, 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 too much of a good thing. Now, a Jupiter, and I'm talking about what? Sun, Mars on the ascendant or whatever. We talked about Mars and the other thing. How is mine different? How and what is it? And what is mine actually saying? And if mine is so different from his, is it really relevant to my chart? Right? Now, generally, often when I do make these kind of little blanket statements about certain placements, then but at the same time, if certain charts make certain things very, very different. So what I would say, if something does come up in my chart, in your chart that I'm talking about, the very first thing you should be looking at is, how is that different? Is he really talking about me just because I have the same thing? Because mine is obviously going to manifest differently from that chart. Is it just generally that, or is he speaking specifically to this chart? So just keep that in mind generally, because a lot of people are into astrology because they want to know what's going on with their chart. And so then we get greedy when we all of a sudden hear something that we've got, but we need to be discerning, right? Traditional astrology is all about judgment, right? And so we have to really make judgment about, oh, is he really talking about me? I've got that. I don't really, I've got that, but mine does this and mine does that and mine does this. Theirs does this and theirs does that and theirs does this. Oh, maybe he's not really referring specifically to me. And then, of course, I'm happy to clarify if you want me to. All right. So let's see. So we just moved. Oh, so we found the part of spirit, right, which was in Libra, right? And Venus is the ruler of Libra. Where is she? She's in Taurus. She's with isn't that interesting? Okay, she's in Taurus with K2. We've got a very new person coming in. Hi, Seneca, welcome. So she's there with K2. Now, one of the things that K2 does is K2 takes us away from earthly desires. That K2 is called the moksha karaka. And so it will, so more than likely, now this, we're talking about a person who is a celibate monk, a celibate priest, right? This is a pope, but this is also a celibate priest. Thus, that makes quite a bit of sense with K2 and Venus, even though she's in Taurus, which is sensual, right? Taurus is about the pleasure of the senses. And note how all of these planets, Sun, Mercury, Venus, are in Taurus. However, that also means that the sun is either combusting or hiding those things under the rays. And so Venus being at 13 degrees 13 degrees away from the sun means that she's under the rays. So usually when a planet is combust, so when it's between 8 degrees and 8 degrees and a half and 16 minutes from the sun, then it's considered burned. It's considered burned out. It's husked out. The sun kind of ends up taking on its characteristics. Now, anything can be made to work on a personal level. Anything. However, what you will find is that often the house that is ruled by the planet who is combusted will be affected. So in this case, no planet. Well, the moon is the house that is the most affected because she's the closest. So that means that the ninth house in this chart would be affected. Now, isn't that interesting? The ninth house in this chart is affected. Now, we talked about this chart when we talked about the ninth house. Okay, we talked about Pope John Paul II when we talked about the ninth house. We've also got here that the part of spirit is ruled by Venus, who's with the moon. What she's with, no, sorry, with the sun, Mercury. The sun is God. Don't forget the sun is God and religion. The sun, Mercury, K2. So the mind is there. The rational mind is there. The sun, who represents religion, is there with the Venus as well. The sun is God and the mind is God. And then all of that stuff is happening in a fixed sign. So obviously Venus also represents worship and what's the word? Sacrifice and worship, deifying someone, loving them so much that you make a god out of them. That's a Venusian thing. We venerate. Venerate comes from venerate. All of that comes from the word Venus. We venerate your cross, right, on Good Friday. That's we Venus your cross. So veneration is a major part of this person's spirit, right? The part of spirit, the ruler of the spirit is this Venus. This Venus is about veneration, but even though it's happening in a sensual, licentious sign, remember the licentious signs are Aries, Taurus, Leo, Libra, Capricorn. The K2, in my opinion, erases the libidinousness from it. I don't think there are many priests that I believe were not celibate, but I do believe that John Paul II was, and I think that this is somewhat proof of it. I think that the veneration is to God, right? Which is this, and also like we use triplicity rulers in this group, and Venus would be is she the first triplicity ruler or the second? She'd be the first, but that would represent travel. Okay, so that's interesting. And the second would be the moon, which represents, and we had talked about that. That's right, which would be faith and religion, because the moon and the square to the Saturn and the how he policed the ideas and how conservative he was and how he policed the ideas. But we can see that here with this very fixed way of venerating, this very fixed way of thinking and of seeing God and working with God. And so there's this very fixed way of venerating the faith. And there'd be a very fixed way of one of the things that he would hear nothing about Maciel when people mention. He'd heard about it. He would hear nothing about it. He would do nothing. Nothing could be done about almost any of this sexual stuff. Almost most of the worst stuff happened under JP2. And nothing could happen until he died and Benedict XVI took over. So
Okay.
even that, this connection with the Venus is interesting. What are you going to say?
With that in mind, do you think that that also speaks to that K2 Venus?
Yes. Yes, I do. I don't think it's all that does. But note that the moon is in the eighth, which is, see, remember or not remember, the moon, I mean, the eighth house is a place of abuse. It's a place of fear. It's a place of terror. It's where the monster is. Note that the second duplicity ruler, which represents faith, is in the eighth. It's in, he inspired fear in theologians in the area of that. But then at the same time, the moon is in so the eighth is religion. So there's somehow this person is aiding and abetting abuse because the abuse is the eighth house, and the Venus is with the ruler of the eighth house.
Right. That's rough. Ooh. He also has that Jupiter Neptune situation going on there as well.
Yeah, he does. Right. Exactly. He has the same one. This is in the 10th. Right. And so we got to see a benevolent monarch. We got to see it. Right. He's the first celebrity pope. We got to see a benevolent man of God when really he was tearing the church in two.
Right. Right. Yuck.
So we see the Mars on the spirit, the descent. Right. He comes in right after he comes in and dismantles all of the things that we got with Vatican II. Almost all. Right. So there's the descent. There's the disruption. He disrupted progress. That's why there's so many lapsed Catholics right now. It's almost all of the people that left the church, that have left the church like in droves, like where the demographic really changed. All of that happened since 1979 when he became Pope. Most of that happened then. It didn't happen before.
That's true. My grandma spent a lot of money to go see this man more than once. So yeah.
He was the celebrity Pope. I mean, this was one of the best media personalities, like one of the best public relations campaigns of all time was what they did with Pope John Paul II.
But
seriously.
I remember also, like, before he became a pope, he was really into theater. So I always thought he was kind of like the theatrical pope or whatever. Like
so loved. Oh, that makes so much sense. Yes. Yeah, that does. So he would love the trappings of the theatrical. And Jupiter's the ruler of the fifth, entertainment. And Venus is entertainment. And Venus and Mercury are performance. Very interesting. Right? So, yeah, you captured another aspect of this person's spirit. Their interest in the arts. That's right, because there were a lot of important concerts, classical music concerts that happened at the Vatican when he was there as well. He was really into music and the arts as well. I forgot about that. And that's, mind you, that's supposed to be a papal thing since the 15th century as a patron of the arts. But yes, that was definitely a quality of the time. And so we can see that. Great catch. Sylvia Plath. So I thought we'd see what her spirit's all about, because she's the one that put her head in an oven, fed her kids, put her head in the oven and killed herself. And was dealing with a lot of mental issues her entire life. I think she was 32 or something when she committed suicide. They think that she may have sexually abused her daughter. She had gone way out. So let's see if we can see any of that. So note that the part of fortune is in the 12th. Self-undoing. And the Saturn, the ruler of the 12th, is strong. Right? So Saturn can produce for both houses. And note that Saturn is also the ruler of the ascendant. He can produce for all three houses. He can produce for the body. He can produce for the future wishes and goals. And he can produce for the self-undoing. And the fortune is there. So that's already... See, have you noticed that in almost every single chart, the fortune has been a major important indicator? Every single time. Every single chart that I've looked at, the part of fortune has pointed us to where things might be either good or bad. So now let's look to see where the part of spirit is. It's daytime, so we're going moon to sun. So we're going forward 30 minus 4. So forward 30 is 29 degrees of Pisces, minus 4 is 25 degrees. So let's say 25 degrees of Pisces. So Jupiter rules the spirit. So Maria, remember what we were just saying about what a planet can do?
Yeah. So
Jupiter's in Virgo.
Jupiter is not strong in Virgo at all.
And Jupiter's with K2.
Yeah.
And Jupiter's with Neptune. Venus is with Neptune.
Venus is there, so it's like augmenting. Too much of a good thing, right?
Yeah, and too much of a good thing is actually kind of bad, right?
It's bad because of the sign that it's in, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And note that Venus is the ruler of the 8th house, and the moon is in the 8th house.
And the moon's in Libra. I don't know if that's...
Well, the moon's in the 8th. That's more important.
Yeah,
right? So,
the moon is in the 8th.
So the moon's in Libra, which brings us back to all that stuff.
Death and just darkness, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And note that the closest, I mean, even though it's separating, the closest relationship is between Venus and Jupiter. So it's putting the spirit and death very close together.
Mm-hmm.
Very close together. And
plus
also,
the sun is in the 8th, right?
Say that again.
The sun.
Yeah. I mean, it's at the very, very end. Very, very end of the 8th.
Yeah.
But note also that Venus is applying to the ruler of the ascendant.
Mm-hmm.
So the ruler of the 8th is applying to the ruler of the 1st, and the spirit is with the ruler of the 8th.
Yep.
But does it point to mental problem or rather, I guess?
Well, Mars is in the 6th house, right? That's not.
Mars is in the 7th, but I guess my question was going to be, what do we think was running around in there? So we can see that it's
depression.
Okay. What do you think? What do you say?
Depression.
Depression. Why?
That Saturn ruling the 12th as well.
But aside from that, we know that obviously that's going to be an issue. But we're trying to figure out what is the thinking. What's the thinking? And the thinking would be either the moon, which represents our thoughts. It would be this Jupiter, and it would be this Mercury, right, who rules the Jupiter. So we see this Mercury in Scorpio. Is this a person? I'm thinking that this is a person who was obsessed with control that she did not have.
So something also it's telling me about her perceptions of the people around her.
What's that? Where is that?
Because her moon is in the 8th and kind of very close to the 7th, it just tells me that her emotions were tied to her social network a lot.
Maybe. Because the 8th house is not the 7th, right? So once we leave the 7th house, we're not in the 8th. The 8th house is actually the money of the partner, right? It's the 2nd from the 7th. So even though people have a tendency to connect it, and even in Jyotish, they call it the house of marital bond. But the 8th house itself has a standalone meaning that has nothing to do with the 7th house. So personally, I would not necessarily say that I find that to be the case. Now, before I go on, I want to talk just a little bit about the courage to be wrong, or the courage to just say whatever the fuck. Because on some level, it's really important, even if I don't agree, and I could certainly be wrong and you could certainly be right. The issue, actually, in my opinion, is that there are other things that indicate that better than what you've used, in my particular opinion. However, it's important to me that we all take risks, and as long as there is a logic behind them, which there was with you, then then we're cool. In my particular instance, I'm not 100% behind the logic that you gave us, and so I don't necessarily think, because we know that there was a problem with self-isolation.
Yes, I think my logic was definitely very weak, but I think I feel like it was leading on to something. What I noticed was, I feel like indicating something else, which you said, like you said, um, it's better indicated elsewhere. So I'm here to
You picked it
let,
up, but
yeah.
I don't think you're wrong. I just don't think it's the moon that's indicating it. So let me make that really clear. If anything, it is what we were talking about, the Jupiter Venus K2 thing, right? Because all of that's happening in the seventh, right? So we know that even being in relationships is triggering this person on some level. And the Venus is in Virgo and the Jupiter is in Virgo. Both of those planets are detrimented in that sign, right? Jupiter is in detriment, Venus is in fall. So this person is having problems showing love. This person is having problems integrating the love thing. Note that the Mercury is applying to the Venus from Scorpio, her detriment. Note that the Mercury just left the square of Mars. So that means that Mercury is translating Mars to Venus.
She felt completely overpowered.
Yeah, this is why I'm coming back to this idea of I can't control myself. I don't know how to control, right? Saturn is about control. Scorpio is about control. Virgo is about control. Jupiter, Venus is too much of a good thing. I'm not in control. Whenever I see Venus and Jupiter together, I think, what part of their life is out of control? And it's usually where Pisces is. And Pisces is in the first house, her head, her life, right? First house is the house of life. First house is the head. Venus, Jupiter rules that moon, her mind. Yeah, so
That
that's
makes
my
me think, sorry, that makes me think he was like financially strict with her. Like she wasn't really able to move in a partnership. She was just like an adornment in the house for the most part. And like,
well, she and her husband were both writers. And
interesting.
yeah, her husband was a writer and he got published first, and then she did, and she surpassed him.
Really?
Mm-hmm. But she couldn't sustain it. She couldn't sustain it because she wasn't stable. And see, that's in my opinion what this moon is looking at. See, the moon being in my opinion, this moon being ruled by all of this stuff, this Venus Jupiter K2, she couldn't stabilize. The Mercury leaving the square of Mars, it's exact. Mercury. Oh wait, yeah, no, it's exact with minus 14 minutes. It's separating for only 14 minutes. So this person also might have been a liar. She might have been lying to herself, or she might have been, Mercury Mars is the unlawful, right? So this person might have, found herself out of control, doing things that she couldn't control, thinking things, saying things she couldn't control. Mars, I call Mars Leo the rager. It rages, right? So there could be a raging quality. She could have gone on raging benders. She could have raged against the machine. She could have raged against her family and husband, right? She put her head in an oven. There's Mercury Mars.
That Jupiter K2 tells me it was maybe more internal though. Like she was one of those people who would probably implode.
Right. No, because Jupiter is the ruler of the spirit. So we're definitely talking about something we can't see. An implosion. And that's exactly what happened. Yeah, something we can't see. Wonderful. Okay, now we come to our two porn actors. The first one is retired, and the second one is still working. The second one is actually working. He just released something yesterday. This is Jeff Stryker, who really is the first kind of crossover gay porn superstar, right? There were gay porn superstars prior to him, but Jeff Stryker also did bisexual porn. He did straight porn, but he got his thing he got his beginning in gay porn and became a humongous star, a huge star, and is probably one of the most famous gay porn actors of all time. Like one of the great names in gay porn of all time. So now I'm always interested in the charts of sex workers and porn actors and actresses because I'm always interested in what are the factors that bring people to doing sex work. I myself have done sex work in the past, and so it's just interesting to see if there is a connection between that kind of what's in the chart and what's going on. Of course, there usually is. Note that sex work, right? That Venus is on the part of fortune, and that the part of fortune is on the cusp of the fifth house of pleasure, and that Venus is in her joy of the fifth house of pleasure, right? Every single chart we have seen, the part of fortune has been showing us something. It's been pointing to exactly what we're talking about. All right, every single chart. So once again, this is why I call the part of fortune the path to fortune on someone. Okay, so now let's look for it's nighttime, so let's look for the part of spirit. So it looks like we're going from moon to sun, so that would be Taurus to Leo is 90 degrees and plus 15. Note that his sun is very close to Regulus. Right, this chart is very blessed. Note that I think there's only one planet that's not in its own sign. Venus is in Libra, Sun is in Leo, Jupiter in Pisces, Saturn in Aquarius. Mars is the only planet that isn't in his own sign. Mercury in exaltation and domicile. Right, so in my opinion, a moon in exaltation. In my opinion, I was saying that this chart could probably become famous no matter what it did. Right, this chart has so much mojo, but we know from the part of fortune that they were going to be attracted to Venusian things, right? So let's see what the part of spirit is thinking about. What's the unseen? What don't we know about this person? What can't we see? So it's 90 plus 15. So 22 plus 15 is 37, which would, oh wait, that was the part of spirit. That was the part of fortune. So we need to go the opposite way. So it's 90 27. So it's back and then back another 15. I think that's what it is. So back 90 and the back another. Okay. Back 90 to 22 and back another to, oh shit. 7 degrees. 8 degrees of Pisces. Okay. So note that in both cases, now this in my opinion this is one of the conditions for fame. When you have the ruler of the part of fortune on the part of fortune and the ruler of the part of spirit on the part of spirit, or vice versa. Often that can be an indicator. So for the person who asked me about that, this is one of those indicators. So Jupiter of course is wealth and benefit. And Jupiter is in Pisces, which is also the what? The exaltation of Venus. So not only do we have Venus ruling the part of fortune, right, kind of inclining the person towards pleasurable Venusian pursuits as a career or as a life path, but then we have Jupiter. We have this highly expansive Jupiter with no strings, with no restrictions. I think, as a matter of fact, he's the one who said that he can't really call himself anything. He says he could be sitting on a bus and find himself attracted to someone. He's attracted to both sexes, all kinds of people, all kinds of things. And Pisces is everything, kind of the everything under the sun kind of thing. So they've got this Jupiter, and Jupiter is also like, hey, I'll try anything once, or hey, why not? We'll go with the flow. And Jupiter and Pisces is, hey, go with the flow, right? So I think we've got a very interesting case. Both Jupiter and one of the things that I think we were talking about last week or the week before was that in order to have pleasure, you've got to have benefit, right? We enjoy that which we benefit from, right? Jupiter is benefit, Venus is pleasure, but Jupiter is also pleasure. We enjoy Jupiterian things. Now, Jupiterian things can be lofty, right? They can be, it can be learning from the guru, but I enjoy that. right? I benefit from it and I enjoy that. Not everybody might. So anyway, so that's kind of my point. So this is a chart about kind of making a life about enjoyment, and trying all kinds of, doing all kinds of things, enjoying joy, the Venusian, and the no, no walls, no restrictions, no restrictions. Now, here's the funniest thing is that this Jeff Stryker is one of the least romantically inclined porn actors. Like, he's not a passionate kisser. He's not a kisser. He always is the kind of a rough, kind of tradey. And so note that the Mars in the first, like he always he's got this beautiful kind of pretty boy look, but at the same time, he always talks real dirty and rough to people, and he's a little bit mean and whatever. So the Mars is there, but we can see that as far as but we also know that he's not like that in regular life, too. That's another thing. But the persona that he created is very kind of this Mars, and I love how Mars is in Gemini, which is ruled by Mercury, and it's because he's like the king of the dirty talk. But yeah, so I think that kind of gives us a look into Jeff Stryker. Inside Jeff Stryker is this Jupiter in Pisces who's like, hey, well, whatever, let's go with it. Oh, well, if you say it feels good, okay. Oh, wow. Well, you say there's going to be a kilo of Coke at the party. Oh yeah, let's go. I mean, Jupiter is in Pisces, right, which is Venus's exaltation, and she is on the part of fortune, and he is on the part of spirit. This is Owen Hawke. And Owen Hawke, as I mentioned, is an actor who is still at it. He's actually the owner of a studio. And then he's also been involved in porn for, I don't know, probably 20 years at this point. He's 43. He still looks fantastic. And what I like about him, or he's kind of a porn crush of mine, but what I like about him is he's kind of an example of a nondescript, like of an invisible, anonymous kind of sexual person. And he's very much kind of very different from Jeff Stryker, in that he's very Jeff Stryker almost came off as though he wasn't really into having sex with men in his porn things, whereas Owen Hawke is very obviously gay and very, very into the whole gestalt of gay sex, and being I don't think he would mind me calling him a sex pig. He's definitely part of that, what we call sex pig community. So let's see. So first of all, we also have Venus in Libra. Note that. So we've got Venus and Libra on the cusp of the fifth, and with Mercury and all of that stuff. We've got the part of fortune in Sagittarius with Neptune. So I remember I've looked, obviously, I've had this chart for a little while. I did contact him about see if I could use the chart, and this is my first time working with it in any kind of public capacity. And I remember I had some things that I wondered about. I'm going to actually contact him and see if he will confirm. But one of them was if this person had a really, really strong fantasy life, right? The Neptune on the part of fortune, right? So the pursuit of fantasy, if that was something that was a major, and obviously it is, because one of his his studio is called Dark Alley. So I'm always looking to see where's the Dark Alley in the chart. But Dark Alley is about a very particular type of fantasy, sexual fantasy, and it really does involve the hunt. It's very much about it's often very much about anonymity and about hunting, about what happens when you find it, so it's very much about like about what's found at the end of the hunt, about cruising, and sexual cruising is really about hunting. And there we have the arrow. Okay, so then that means that Jupiter is the ruler of the part of fortune, and it's in Virgo, which is a very interesting thing for a porn actor, right? But we know we've also got all this stuff in Libra. So let's see what it brings us to for the spirit. Note also that the moon is in Taurus, so licentious, and the moon is the ruler of the ascendant. So licentious sign the moon is in the licentious sign of Taurus, and it's the ruler of the ascendant here. So this person is feeling everything through their physicality and through their senses and sensuality, right? That's pretty much this entire life is about encountering life via my senses and via the senses that are pleasurable, right? And that's from the moon, and that's also from this, right? The moon is ruled by this Venus, and the Venus is there in the house of pleasure in her joy. Okay, so let's find it's nighttime, right? So sun to moon. So that would be 210, right? 180 degrees would be 13, 14 Libra, right? 210 would bring us to 14 Taurus. So we're going to move back 13. So 210 brings us to 9, minus 14. So minus 10 is 28. And minus another 4 is 26. Or 22.
There's
yes.
dark alley.
There it is.
Yeah.
The Capricorn?
Right.
Yeah. Saturn, darkness. Very good. Yes, I agree. I agree. So there's a dark alley. So now what's interesting is that even though this guy's a performer, he also owns a business. He also has a business. He's made a business of this. He's not the best known as a performer. Like unless you maybe follow that particular type of porn, or you're into his type of man, he might not be a very well known porn actor. There's so many types of porn actors, people in porn, and certainly he's a veteran and he's been around a long time and he's respected in the industry and all that stuff, but he's not a celebrity, right? We just looked at a celebrities chart. But Saturn in Virgo for the spirit, what's that about? What do we think that's about? Because that probably doesn't have a lot. That might be why he, instead of going into trying to be a performer, he went into behind the scenes and just this person is what? About getting the details right, about we just saw another Saturn in Virgo spirit. Remember, that was Franco Corelli. So that should be, do we have everything we need? I don't think we can do it like this. I don't think that's going to work like that. Maybe that's why, right? Maybe that's why that the focus hasn't been so much on performance for him, because maybe when he got himself involved in things, he would be like, hey, you know what, that light, I think if we move the light just a little bit more than we can, and they'd be like, motherfucker, why don't you get into the business? Why don't you get behind the thing? Well, fuck it, I will. I think that might have been what happened.
Right.
I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
And that Jupiter is also there, which is also giving light to what he does in that 6th place. You see what I'm talking about?
Say that again, honey. Say that one more time.
The Jupiter is also there in Virgo, and it's also a Rahu. But anyway, it's in Virgo in the 3rd, right? Right.
And the part of fortune.
Right. And that's giving light to that. More information there. Plus, the 9th place is giving a lot more of like that actually coming to fruition.
Yes. And see, so in this case, this person is really about, how can I make this better? How can I bring what's missing? What's missing? What didn't happen the way it should? And so maybe as a performer, he might have driven people crazy, or he might not have. Maybe as a performer, I mean, obviously this guy loves sex. I mean, that's obvious. He's still performing. I mean, he's got an OnlyFans. He's still got, his studio. He does other stuff with other studios. So he obviously enjoys performing, but on some level, I think when he was doing it, he was either thinking, I can do this better, or this is missing, or this isn't the kind of fantasy that I want to promote, right? Because we know the Neptune's on the part of fortune, right? So
right.
it could have been, oh, this isn't the kind of fantasy I want to promote. I keep getting these things with these fucking twinks. And or I keep getting these things where they want to make me into an Adonis. They want to make me into into a pretty boy, into a muscle boy. He's a big muscle daddy now, but he wasn't back 20 years ago. He was much more kind of, I don't want to say nondescript, but a little bit more nondescript, and certainly not like one of the pretty boy or buffed out muscle jocks or whatever. So it's interesting to me because usually that's why people go into porn. This is one of the reasons I'm so interested at why people go into porn. People go into porn for so many different reasons. You get men that go into because they're really good looking, right? They're not into gay sex or whatever, but they know that they can make money. They're really good looking and they can just do it. You've got men who've got really big cocks. You've got men who are sex pigs. You've got men who are attention whores and will do anything for attention. You've got sexual opportunists. You've got people who are in abusive relationships who pimp them out and who make them do porn. You have drug addicts who will do anything for money and who find themselves in porn. You have prostitutes, escorts. You have prostitutes who, in order to make, in order to get more clients, or escorts. I'm going to use not prostitutes, but you have escorts. Nowadays, that's essentially what's going on. We've got a vast network of escorts who now have their own kind of studios that they themselves have created, and it's essentially what's the word I'm looking for? It's advertisement for their wares. Right. So this is one of the main reasons that I got into it. In my opinion, obviously, this person is attracted to all things sexual, right? The moon. Remember, the moon is our desire nature, and Venus is our desires. The moon, Venus is ruling the moon, and she's ruling the 5th house of pleasure. And she's in the 5th house of pleasure, 1 degree away from the cusp, right? And so is Mercury, the mind. So both aspects of the mind are ruled by Venus. Right, this person has pleasure, sexual, all the pleasures on the mind all the time, but the spirit itself is all about breaking it down, making it better, because this isn't good enough, and I don't like it like this. So right. This, in my opinion, is why, right? Because and it's connected with the ruler of the look. The ruler of the part of fortune has nothing to do with Venus. Right? It's her fall. All this stuff is in her fall. So this person, yeah, I love sex and I love all this shit, but when it comes to work, there's all this shit that needs to be done. That's not good enough. You didn't put that in the right place. That light isn't bright enough. Put a different filter on that light. That's what this is about, in my opinion.
Yeah, change the angle of the camera. Like, we're only going to record for a certain amount of time in this angle. Like, yeah, he'd be thinking about all that shit in the background. I could see why he would go into the development side. That would be frustrating.
Right? I mean, he can't help his nature. He can't help his actual nature, which is, touch me. Oh, does that feel good? Oh, does that? Oh, and more than likely, it could also. The other question I had for him was through relationship. If through relationship, he also. In gay culture, there are you find groups of men who all have sex together, right? They might have sex together one-on-one, and then they'll get together for orgies together. So they become an 11th house conglomerate. Note that Venus is the ruler of the 11th.
Right.
As well. And so he was very much, I perceived him very much as that kind of sexual sexual fraternity kind of person, and through relationship that most of the sexual experiencing would happen. And even to this day, it's kind of going this way. Like often you will see Owen Hawke in group sessions. You very rarely see, not rarely, but it's much more common to find him in a group session. And matter of fact, the last thing he just did was fantastic, Daddy Swap with a 4-way. So so that's Owen Hawke, and that's kind of the. Oh, now does Owen Hawke have a spirituality? I bet he does.
I would say so. There's a lot of strong pointers to that. Yeah.
And the Saturn's ruler of the 9th, so the ruler of the part of fortune is with the ruler of the 9th, and the ruler of the spirit is with Jupiter. Right. And so I think that, yeah, he probably does have it's practical, right? It's practical, but there is one. He might be a Buddhist. He might do the Nam-myoho
right,
or something like that.
I saw that too. Yeah. I was, I wonder if this person would be into magic, because looking at those placements gives me a little bit of indication to that.
But Virgos, they call Mercury the ruler of earthy things. Virgos usually, well, and the moon's in Taurus, so that's usually, if I can't see it, touch it, feel it, it's not real.
Okay.
I think we got more of that going. Is that if it because this person must actually encounter. Taurus for me is about the sensual encounter, the encounter of the senses. And so this is, it's all via pleasure through, and Venus's sexual pleasure particularly, right? So this person is this lifetime, right? Because remember, the moon is also the ruler of the ascendant in this chart. This lifetime is about encountering the senses through pleasure in a continual manner. But then once again, when we come to what the path of this person might be and what they're thinking, what's going on, what we don't see, right? What we see is the porn actor with the big dick in Daddy Swap, right? But what we don't see is this problem solver. We don't see this problem solver who can break it all down and tell you what's wrong with everything.
I can see that. I'm looking at that K2 too. The position of that K2 and what's feeding that too. So there's a lot. He might actually be very, very spiritual.
Yeah, it's very possible. But it needs to be something practical he can do, right? And you give him a duty. Something, give him a duty.
Would you say it would be more like worshiping like at a temple or doing that kind of thing, like more ritualistic?
I would say for what would be useful if this person is interested in spirituality, you know, we're definitely speculating, is that they would probably, I would think mantra might be better. Note that the moon's the ruler of the first and the second, and then also Mercury is the ruler of Virgo. Mercury rules the tongue, and mantra gives you something to do and be useful and experience. And once again, this person needs to encounter things viscerally. This person needs to encounter things. This person might be a kinetic learner, a physical learner. You know, this person might need to do things in order to learn things, right? And so because I'm talking about the moon in Taurus here, right? So there's a real viscerality and a substantiation and it has to be something substantial. It has to be concrete. That's it, a concretization. So, in my opinion, this person, this person would, if it's too out in the ethers, or if it doesn't make sense, right, Virgo? If it doesn't make sense, they might not want to be bothered with it, right? But if you say, "Hey, do this mantra, and it will do this," okay. I'm doing my mantra every day, 5 o'clock every morning. I wake up, I do my mantra. That would be this kind of thing, in my opinion. But this person would want a practical duty that they could do. That would be an expression of their
Gotcha. Thank you.
And it should be for
I just wasn't sure what you meant by like physical, you know, like if it had to be something of the physical world, like ritualistic or what. But I guess mantras are also rituals in a way.
Yes, absolutely. They're sadhana. Basically, it's a form of sadhana. And so, I mean, if there were more fire-oriented things, then the sadhana could be do a fire ceremony every day, right? With Venus, it could be, you know, pray and worship and, you know, and venerate your god or whatever. You know what I'm saying? It would be different depending on who we're talking about. It's Saturn, right? So Saturn follows rules usually. That's what's interesting about this chart. Virgo and Saturn, those are both kind of rule following and structuring, right? And the porn, we don't really think about those things when we think about the world of porn, which is why it makes perfect sense for him to own a studio and be behind the scenes and organize.
You gotta get this guy. You got to talk to him because now I'm interested. I want to know the follow up.
I'm gonna send him a thing. He was the very first person that I contacted, and he was super. We'd had a little bit of a Twitter, you know, whatever, and he was super sweet. And so I finally was like, hey, you know, we've had some interaction already. Would you be open to, you know, giving me your chart and etc. So I can't wait to put this up, because the minute it's up, I'm gonna send it to him and see if he'll watch it. All right. Any questions about any of the charts? You want me to revisit any of the other charts, or anything else? No. Okay, I'm going to stop the